Today, we're diving into one of the most underrated yet deadly aggressive responses to 1d4, the Mexican defense, starting with knight to f6 followed by knight to c6. It's offbeat, underused, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. You'll often catch your opponent out of book early and steer the game into sharp attacking territory right away. This video covers 3 major variations of the Mexican defense. When white plays knight to c3, when white pushes the e-pawn early to a5, and when white develops with knight to f3. We'll explore practical ideas for black, common tactical themes, and real game lines that lead to attacking positions, not just equal ones. Let's start with the most common path. White develops with knight to c3. So, white begins with pawn to d4, and we reply with knight to f6. Standard stuff. Then comes pawn to c4, and now the Mexican defense begins. Knight to c6. It may look unusual, but the plan is simple. Pressure the center and stay flexible. White plays knight to c3, reinforcing the center. Now we immediately challenge it with pawn to e5. This leads to complex middle games and gives us the initiative early. White usually responds with pawn to d5, kicking our knight. We move it back to e7, no problem. This retreat is part of the plan, and we follow it with pawn to e4. White grabs space, but here's the trick. We're going to use their space against them. We develop knight to g6, eyeing the e5 and f4 squares, and preparing kingside activity. White brings out their knight to f3, and we calmly play bishop to c5, developing with tempo and aiming directly at the f2 pawn. White continues with bishop to d3, and now we strike in the center with pawn to d6, preparing to bring our other pieces into the game and potentially break open the center. White castles kingside, and we play pawn to a5, preparing a 4 to kick any queenside structure and give our rook a file. After white plays pawn to a3 to prevent that, we finish with a powerful idea. Knight to g4. This knight jump creates real pressure. It eyes the h2 square, threatens to trade off defenders, and opens the door for queen and bishop coordination. White's king is suddenly looking unsafe, and we haven't even castled yet. From this position, black has a 63% win rate at intermediate and advanced levels. Why? Because the position is dynamic, flexible, and sharp. We control the center indirectly. We've developed all our pieces, and we've created active threats without overextending. The Mexican defense in this variation gives black aggressive chances, fast development, and a way to punish passive or automatic play by white. Next, let's look at one of the strongest replies to the Mexican defense. 3 pawn to d5, an aggressive push by white to claim space early. We respond with knight back to e5, keeping the position flexible. Even though we retreat, we're not losing ground. We're just waiting for the right moment to counterattack. This variation, by the way, gives black an impressive 60% win rate, so let's break down why. White plays pawn to e3, a solid move to support the center. We continue with pawn to e6, freeing our dark square bishop and eyeing central control. White develops naturally with knight to c3, and we strike with bishop to b4, pinning that knight and applying pressure. They play bishop to d2 to break the pin. That's our cue to castle kingside. Safety first. White pushes pawn to a3 to kick our bishop. We don't hesitate. We capture the knight on c3, and white takes back with their bishop. Now we go pawn to d6, supporting e5 and prepping for the center to open. White brings out their knight to f3, and we strike with pawn takes pawn on d5. They recapture cx d5, and now we drop rook to e8, planting it on an open file, perfectly aligned with our strategy. At this point, we've achieved our goals: fast development, active pieces, and total control over the center. We've traded their best central knight and created structural imbalances that we can target later. This is the beauty of the Mexican defense. We invite white forward, then flip the script. In this variation, We get the kind of dynamic and attacking position that wins games, and that's exactly why it holds that strong 60% win rate for black. In this final variation, white chooses the calm and flexible knight to f3. We respond with pawn to e6, staying solid while preparing to develop quickly. White continues with knight to c3, and we immediately pin some pressure onto their position with bishop to b4. Already, we're setting up active piece play. Then comes bishop to g5, but we don't mind. We strike the center with pawn to d6, preparing to challenge everything. White builds up with pawn to e4, and we hit back with pawn to h6, immediately asking that bishop what it's doing. White captures on f6 with bishop takes knight, and we retake confidently with queen to f6. No doubled pawns, and our queen is ready to help the kingside attack. White develops calmly with bishop to a2, and we castle kingside, safe and ready for action. They castle too, and now we make a big positional decision. Bishop takes knight on c3, followed by pawn takes bishop. Now we slam the door shut with pawn to a5, grabbing the center and setting up dark square dominance. White tries pawn to d5, hoping to block us out. But we reroute our knight to e7, aiming for f4 or g6, perfect for a kingside initiative. They try distracting us with rook to b1 and pawn to a4, but we calmly mirror with pawn to b6 and pawn to a5, locking that flank down. And now the killer, knight to g6. That knight eyes f4 and h4, and our queen's already watching from f6. The kingside attack is loading up. And white, out of ideas. This variation showcases the power of patience and strategic buildup. By the end, we have total control of the center, a locked-down queenside, and a perfectly placed army pressuring the king. This isn't just solid. It's dominating, and it's how we flip quiet openings into big wins. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope these lines in the Mexican defense give you a lethal surprise weapon as black. Whether you're climbing the ranks or just looking to spice up your repertoire, this opening can catch your opponents off guard and hand you easy wins. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment on which line was your favorite. I'll see you in the next video. And until then, good luck in your games and may your next checkmate be fast and flawless.